Episode number 197 of the Wholesome Fertility Podcast. So in today's episode, I'm going to talk about the luteal phase, the importance of the luteal phase, what it is, how you can find out if it's long enough when it comes to getting pregnant. Welcome to the Wholesome Fertility Podcast. I'm Michelle, a fertility acupuncturist here to provide you with resources on how to create a wholesome approach to your fertility journey. So the luteal phase is basically the second half of your cycle after ovulation. So I'm just going to give you a little quick rundown in case you're not familiar with a menstrual cycle. I've talked about this in a couple of episodes, but it is really important to know, especially if you are trying to conceive. You want to know your fertile window. You want to know what's going on. Is there a possibility that after the fertile window, which is the luteal phase, if it's too short, that can actually impact implantation, and it can impact your ability to conceive. So basically, your menstrual cycle, which day one is when you're bleeding. Day one is your menstrual cycle, not when you spot, but when you actually bleed. That's considered day one. A lot of people have apps and they track their menstrual cycle. While that's great, it's really important to also do something that I would really suggest is at least for a month or two to track your basal body temperature. A lot of these apps also have a place where you can put the temperature, and they also have charts and calendars that they bring up so you can see the charts to show you like what the temperature is like. And typically what you'll find is that is what is going to confirm whether and when you ovulated. So if you're just using the app, it's going to give you some kind of random guess on when you ovulated. So you may have a perfect 28-day cycle, and even though you have a perfect 28-day cycle, you may not be ovulating exactly in the middle. Now, ovulation can be a range, and there's no major right or wrong, meaning like it could be a little early, it could be a little late, but you just don't want it to be too late, because if it is too late, that means that your time of implantation or the window of implantation is too short. It doesn't allow proper time for implantation. It doesn't allow proper time for the uterine lining to get thick enough to support a pregnancy. So it is really important to have the luteal phase be longer. So starting from the beginning again. So menstruation is day one, the day of the bleed. And then from that day until the day of ovulation is considered to be the follicular phase. And then the day of ovulation, and then after ovulation until the day of the next period would be considered the luteal phase. So typically what happens if you do track your cycle with the temperature, you would be taking your temperature and seeing that, generally speaking, your temperature in the follicular phase is going to be around 97 degrees. And it's considered more of a yin time. So yin and yang, I've talked about this before. Yin is very cooling. It's very moist. You're kind of leading up and you're going to have cervical mucus. So it's a cooling time. It has more moisture. And it's also a little more fluid. You're building up to this point where little by little you're increasing the estrogen. And again, estrogen is another yin hormone. It's considered a yin hormone. And then you're going into this phase where yin and yang are balanced and kind of interchanging or exchanging from yin to yang right at ovulation. And then after ovulation, it goes into a more yang time. So yang is more heating, and you have more activity, and it increases the temperature. So you'll see that, say, in the follicular phase, you have a 97 degree, pretty consistent, like 97.1, 97.8. It goes back and forth, but it's really over 97. In some cases, just FYI, it does go lower. And in those cases, I would definitely check the thyroid and make sure that look with a doctor just to make sure you get all your labs to make sure nothing's going on underlying that's causing that temperature to be too low. So typically for the follicular phase, you want it to be around 97. Then ovulation occurs. And then after ovulation, it should increase by a degree. So typically it'll be 97 in the follicular phase. And then after ovulation, it goes up to 98. And that is considered a more yang time in your cycle. So the heat increases, your temperature increases, and that's typically what a cycle looks like. And you want the second part of the cycle to be long. So it could be anywhere from really 11 to 17 days, but you don't want it shorter than 11 days. When it gets shorter than 11 days, or if you notice that the follicular cycle, even on a perfect 28-day cycle, is long, then you ovulate, and then the luteal phase is too short, that's something that you want to pay attention to. And I've worked with a lot of people in my practice to increase the luteal phase. So typically from a Chinese medicine perspective, a lot of times, and this isn't always the case, and of course this is why it's important to work with somebody. I do also work with people online. I don't just work with people in person. So if you do want to work with me, you can actually go to my website and schedule a discovery call. I do that for both in-person and online consultations and sessions. And typically what happens is in Chinese medicine, for the most part, every situation is very unique, but for the most part, a short luteal phase does respond to a low yang or some kind of deficiency in yang and fire in the body. So a lot of times just using yang herbs, yang boosting herbs, or even heating foods. So like increasing cinnamon or adding that to like a warm water and lemon in the morning, increasing that yang, also covering your feet, having more broths, just really bringing more warmth into your body. And I would even say if it's early in the morning and it's in a warm climate, before it gets too hot and while the sun is safe, it's actually not a bad idea to give your belly some sun exposure to get that infrared heat. Sometimes if you go to an acupuncturist, they might have an infrared light. So you want to bring heat into that area. And then also sometimes acupuncturists do something called moxibustion. It's basically an herb that's very heating in general. Like it has a heating nature. And then on top of that, you burn it. So you burn it and then the smoke from that herb, and you don't put it directly on the skin. You put it away from the skin, but enough where your skin feels the heat. So it actually brings in heat. The smoke itself brings in heat into that area. So sometimes if people are deficient in yang, you give them moxa treatments. And I would not do this at home unless somebody really teaches you how to do this, because you can burn yourself. It's not something that you want to just do on your own, but moxa can really help. And again, like just even getting sun, if it's at a safe time, it's early in the morning, is great, because the sun is the most yang thing really that we are exposed to in nature. The sun is basically yang personified. So it is the most yang thing that we have. So really utilizing that in order to help that, the yang deficiency, or if you also tend to feel cold, then that will definitely confirm that there could be a yang deficiency contributing to a shorter luteal phase. Another thing that you can do is also supplement with beta carotene. Again, this is not something that I suggest for everybody to do. I definitely say check with a person that you're working with, because every person is unique. But beta carotene is actually a form of beta carotene is what causes the corpus luteum to be yellow. So the corpus luteum is the remains of what is left over from the follicle after ovulation. So the follicle is basically a sac with a membrane surrounding, and it holds the egg. So it gets released from that sac, and then whatever's left over from that is called the corpus luteum. And the corpus luteum basically is the remains of the follicle after ovulation occurs. and whatever remains is called the yellow body, and that is what produces progesterone in the body. So if it has sufficient progesterone, the luteal phase shouldn't be too short, should be long enough. So one of the things that I suggested to a patient of mine that had a short luteal phase is to take beta carotene, because beta carotene is part of what makes the corpus luteum yellow. And we also know that it's a precursor to vitamin A, and vitamin A is really important for the maturation of the follicles, because if the follicles are too small, that can cause the corpus luteum to be too small, and it can also cause a deficiency in progesterone. So some other things that can impact progesterone levels, and if progesterone levels are low, it can impact your luteal phase to be shorter. So before we even get started with that, my suggestion is definitely start tracking your temperature, because once you start tracking your temperature, then you can know exactly when you ovulated, because you may have a perfect cycle, 28 days to like 32 days, and it's consistent. That's fine. Or it could be a little shorter, which is still within range, but you don't know for sure. Even if you're taking your LH stick test, you don't know for sure if you definitely ovulated unless you do your basal body temperature, or you do certain tests that also look for progesterone metabolites, such as UVA or PROVE. You don't know that. So it's important to either take a test like that or take your basal body temperature. I definitely suggest the basal body temperature, because then you can see if your temperature is low and you have a little bit of a yang deficiency. It'll give you a little more insight. Once you have that information, and then you can see exactly when you're ovulating and if you're ovulating, and also how long your luteal phase is, it gives you more understanding of what's going on. And one of the things that can cause progesterone to be low is, number one, the follicle's too small. You have a small corpus luteum, or you can also have conditions such as PCOS, high prolactin, blood levels, thyroid disorders, endometriosis, or disruption in the HPA axis, which is really your brain communicating with your ovaries to ovulate. And a lot of times, if you're high stressed, if you exercise too much or eat too little, it could definitely disrupt that. But high stress in general is really important to keep in mind, because if you have high stress, most likely you have high cortisol levels, and progesterone is a precursor to cortisol. So if there's too much cortisol going on in the body or being produced in the body, it's going to compete with the progesterone. And again, it's going to decrease the time for your luteal phase to happen. So all those things are really important, and it can really impact your fertility. Definitely keep that in mind. Another supplement that has been shown to help is vitamin C. And vitamin C has been thought to increase progesterone levels. This has actually been seen in a study where women taking vitamin C supplements for just 3 weeks had a significantly improved progesterone levels. So it's definitely something that can benefit a lot. It's a very potent antioxidant. It's really great for your immune system and to protect you as a whole. So vitamin C are really important to take. Folate is also really important, and folate typically should be in your prenatal vitamins. I prefer folate over folic acid. Folate is a more natural occurring form of B9. And also just keep in mind that B9 folate is something that you actually have to eat in order to have in your system. It's not something that your body just makes. It's also been shown to improve the luteal phase progesterone levels. Another thing just to keep in mind is also supplementing with either antioxidant or having lots of antioxidants in your diet is really important. And keep in mind, beta carotene is also a form of antioxidant. It does protect the cells, it protects egg quality, and it also helps the growth of the follicles, which again is really important because you want a good growth and mature follicles. And then you also want a mature corpus luteum that's going to give you a lot of progesterone levels. So I hope that helped answer a lot of questions. I know this is something that a lot of people want to know about. I mean, there's so much more that you can do. These are just a couple of different things that you can look into, but not every supplement and not every protocol is good for everybody. And many times with Chinese medicine, how we work, it's not a one size fits all. Usually we look at the person's patterns and what they tend to show. And it could be, for one person, it can be stress, and another person, it could be a yang deficiency. So there's many different ways and pathways that can cause the same thing. So again, if you're interested in getting a discovery call and would like to work with me, go ahead and book a discovery call, and then I can give you options on how I work with people online as well. So thank you so much for tuning in today. Have a beautiful day. So that concludes today's episode. You can find all of the links mentioned on the episode notes. If you're enjoying these episodes, please take a moment to share and leave a review. Reviews mean everything to podcasters, and I really enjoy hearing from my listeners. You can also find me on my website at www.thewholesomelotus.com or email me at info@thewholesomelotus.com. I love hearing from my listeners. If you're interested and want updates as well as a free ebook on my top 10 fertility boosting habits, you can visit my fertility page on www.thewholesomelotus.com. I thank you so much for listening in and hope that you have a beautiful day.